Second, welcome everybody to Bald&Balding. We are talking to the one and only Oli Arditi. Is that correct?
Arditi.
Arditi. Okay. And Ro will be with us when his computer works. There he is. Ro is with us. We are live now, Ro. Birdman.
I'm hearing very strange alien noises from Ro. Anyway, hi Mike, hi Ro.
So this is normal. We do this before we go live.
Yeah, how's that?
There we go. Now Ro's with us.
I'm sorry I cut off on you before when we were talking, but my camera's been freezing up, so I downloaded some new software for it, and it demanded a restart of my computer. So there we are. Sorry about that. But so far it hasn't frozen yet, so maybe it fixed it.
I was about to start talking bad about you, but now you're here, so I'll save that for another show.
Sorry, I just got my phone on, and Wrexham Charlton is in its 97th minute, and Charlton just tied, like with 30 seconds left to go in the game. It's really annoying. Sorry.
So we'll talk about soccer later, but first.
No, we won't. That's fine. There's no reason to do that.
So, Oli, I've put on Twitter a couple times, I'm like, do you miss people who spend decades working on their stories? Well, we're talking to Oli, who's doing just that. So please tell us that that's correct, and I'm not lying to all the throng of viewers that we have.
That is absolutely correct. Yeah. So in terms of actual stories, I hope it's not going to take me too long to write each individual novel. But in terms of the world I'm working on, 15 years flat out, fairly intensive work, most recently, but there's stuff in there that goes back to when I was a teenager. So you could call it 40 years. Yeah, I've put some time in. I've done some hours.
You're putting in a lot more kind of hard grind hours though in putting all this down, and you're setting a hell of a foundation, I guess.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I know I speak to a lot of writers who are slightly suspicious of the value of spending so much time world building because they're all about telling stories. And I am very conscious that I need to tell good stories and not just self-publish a series of info dumps of all the fascinating details that are in my world. But I find that once I've done that work, stories and characters spring up like mushrooms. They it really pays off. For me, it really pays off.
So do you just enjoy doing all that kind of background?
Oh yeah.
How could you?
I love it.
I guess you'd have to if you did it for 40 years.
Yeah. No, it's an art form of in its own right, and the beloved Professor Tolkien is probably the best known practitioner of that particular art form, and other people who have made their livings at it are probably all tabletop RPG designers. But just that act of crafting a world and developing cultures and relating languages and societies and all the rest of it, it's an enormous joy. I absolutely love it.
So in your world, I mean, is this like a typical fantasy kind of world? Do you have multiple species of bipedal humanoids and creatures, or is it more just human based?
I made a decision early on to go, okay, let's have these people that, live in underground and are really good at smithing and have beards. And let's have these people who live in the forests and are, slender and elegant. Let's not say that they're not humans. That seems like to me, feels like a very harsh thing to say about anyone who walks around on two legs and talks. So no, there are lots of different cultures, some of which are inspired by the classic fantasy species. But I'm presenting them all to the reader as being human cultures.
What about
there are dragons?
What's that?
There are dragons.
Yeah, that's where I was going exactly next. Yeah. So how do your dragons differ, or are they the same as?
The dragons in my world were the first speaking creatures to be created by the mother goddess. So they're kind of senior to the gods and probably more powerful than the gods. And all but 7 of them are asleep. And those 7 have a kind of role to play in the kind of big meta-narrative into which all the smaller stories will fit. So they're not someone that you're going to go and, kill them and steal their treasure. That's not how it works. They're more like kind of fundamental facets of the universe in this world. But
and then there are gods below them.
There are gods, yeah, or guardians, or not everyone calls them gods. And the gods again they're probably atypical. They're not that interested in what human beings are up to. They don't care about being worshipped. Lots of humans worship them, but they don't actually notice. And they again are kind of representative of fundamental facets of the universe. And I've done an awful lot of work on cosmology, and I was just about to launch into an unnecessarily detailed explanation, but I'll spare you that. So there are things that you could call gods and dragons, but which might not be gods and dragons, to everyone's mind.
So when you're creating all this, is there obviously you're not writing a book yet, right? But you're still having to write all this stuff down. Are you creating it from the very beginning and then going forward like thousands of years in kind of creating this mythology in this world?
I'm kind of zigzagging, because if I want to develop a particular region for a story I want to write, then I need the history of that region and the cultures of that region. So I'll kind of bring that up to the narrative present in more detail than the rest of it, and then I'll need to go back to do other areas. And I've brought now 3 areas up to kind of full detail for writing stories in, but it's a whole world, so there's there's more to come.
So
yeah, go ahead. I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this, and it kind of beggars belief that someone would put that much. And don't get me wrong, I think it's wonderful what you're doing, and I would really like to see it. But to put that much kind of time and energy and effort into the stuff that makes up the story, it would be like a baker spending 2 days prepping their ingredients, for the 2 hours it's going to take to make their cake,
So I was just going to say, I was at a Comic-Con once and I met an author, and he's like, I got a new, a job that actually pays. He's like, and all I had to do is write the backstory for a game. What are the different regions? What are the, who inhabits there? What are they like? Give us a backstory. He goes, it's great. I don't have to worry about plots or characterization. All I'm doing is world building. And I was like, man, some people have all the luck in this world. If I was independently wealthy, I would just have world upon world building, and I'd be like, hey, here's a world. You want to write stories in it? I just want to build. I am with you on this 100%.
I disagree with you, Mike. I don't think it's that easy, man. I mean, you're kind of almost being dismissive of the work that he's having to put into this. And I know you're not being dismissive. That's wrong. I apologize. But I can't. I think it would be harder, because at least with a story that you're trying to tell, there's a narrative beginning and an end. In this, you're setting up all, and there's so much shit to set up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's where like a million freaking rabbit trails that you can follow.
Yes,
and of course you're both right.
That yay.
If all you ever did was do world building all day, you would probably get really fed up and want to write some stories, and vice versa. It is easy in that you don't have to get that intricacy of character motivations working together and coming together in a coherent arc to produce a satisfying conclusion, at least, not in, not on that small scale. But at the same time, other things are difficult, thinking through. And again, this is only if you care. but thinking through the relationship between a culture's mythologies and language and other things, cuisine, music, all of that.
Yep.
That to me is enormous pleasure. It's kind of like you could call it like creative anthropology or something, I guess.
Do you really get into cuisine and
oh yeah, well, I love to cook, so yeah, I'm obsessed with food. So yes, I don't know what my characters are like unless I know what they eat. But also, more importantly, what it's like when they sit down to eat. What cultural and social role does the preparation and consuming of food play in their society? My societies are not cookie cutter, quasi medieval settings. I'm building them. I'm trying to imagine what's possible.
I'm gobsmacked at all of this. I just can't.
I mean, there are precedents. So I would say a writer like Ursula K. Le Guin is a precedent. Not for someone who published, enormously detailed source books, but she published a book in the mid-80s called Always Coming Home, which is essentially, it's just a gathering together of documents relating to a society that she imagined. And some of those documents are narrative, others are not. There is a story there if you want it, but there's also a lot of stuff apart from the story. And, it's a beautiful book. It's a really evocative and poetic book, which is only partly a story.
So give us an example of a food thing that you have done for this world. Does this world have a name, by the way?
Yeah, well, so firstly, it had a name in one of my funny made-up languages, which is the name of the mother goddess, which is Olnazer. But I just thought, actually, let's not hit people with made-up language words straight away. And so it's now called the Inner World.
Okay.
Which is for reasons related to the excessively complicated cosmology that I referred to earlier.
Okay.
So an example of cuisine. Well, there's a city I've developed which is inhabited primarily by members of two different cultures. So it's, food was useful there for distinguishing those cultures. So one culture, basically eats a lot of beans and pulses and likes very spicy food. And one culture eats a lot of fish and vegetables and doesn't like spicy food. So, that kind of, that's quite a prosaic and practical way of deploying cuisine to, once you've established that with the reader, then you can very easily shortcut which of these cultures does this person belong to by, casually mentioning some of that. So, it's not, it's not purely for my own nerdy satisfaction.
So how much, sorry, Mike, how much do you think you have written? You can either judge it by stacks or by words or, reams of paper or what have you, over the course of the last 3 or 4 decades in building this thing up?
So, well, in terms of the kind of essays I have written for myself about the cultures and, histories of my world, probably, no more than a reasonably substantial epic fantasy trilogy, I'd say, 500,000 words odd maybe in there. There's a lot of time spent on maps, and languages take up a lot of time without producing a very large word count. So
okay, maps and languages. I got to start writing notes now. I can remember things to ask. Go ahead, Mike.
So Isaac asked this question, and I don't want it to go away. How many books, stories are you planning on for this world?
Well, having put in the work building the setting and got to a stage where I can feel really, really immersed in it and I know what my cultures are like, the stories are just springing up like mushrooms now. They really just kind of emerge, and I just have to try and type fast enough to get them down. So I think if my life permits me to, I can probably write a book a year for the rest of my life, and I'm 54. So, fingers crossed, maybe 30 odd books.
That's if you started now.
Yeah, well, I've got one draft finished, another half finished.
Okay, so you have actually written a book.
Yes.
Based on this world. Okay.
Yes.
Thank God. Okay. and how long is this draft?
The completed draft is only about 90,000 words, which is pretty standard novel length, chunky novel, I guess. Sadly, it's the first of a trilogy, so I don't think I'm going to be able to sell it to a trad publisher as an unpublished author. I have been advised that they're not buying series from first-time authors at the moment, so which is actually the reason I'm working on the other draft. But that one is still, it's still good. I still like it. When it's finished and ready to go, maybe I'll self-publish that because.
I mean, is the traditional route the route that you want to go, or have you given serious consideration to self-publishing?
I am giving serious consideration to it, yeah. The reason I would quite like to go traditional, if I can get anyone interested, is because I doubt my ability to be sufficiently highly motivated to be very good at selling it and doing all of the other things and, commissioning art and all of the millions of things that go into making a book.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to.
But if I may, I think all of the stuff you've done and the stuff you've mentioned in the last 15 minutes would be the perfect type of content for a variety of social media platforms to promote your book, right? Whether it's the language bit of it, the songs, the food. There are so many different things that you've already done that you just need to now put into a 1 minute or less kind of video. You could probably do enormously well as an indie route.
Right. And I would absolutely envisage going both ways anyway, even if I am lucky enough to get trad interest. There's lots of stuff I would like to publish that it would make far more sense for me to publish indie anyway. Because there are, there's novels, but there will also be, guidebooks, source books, thematic books about different aspects of my world that I think if people like my novels, they will want to read. But I mean, clearly I need to get the novels done in order to generate the interest in that.
I was going to say that those essays you write to yourself about your world, bundle them up in a book and I will buy that. Oh my God.
Yeah. They need a bit of polishing. It's nice when you're just writing for your own reference because you can kind of drift off into and then yada, 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 that kind of thing.
I think people like that, though, even in its rough form, because it kind of gives you a glimpse behind the curtain of what goes into making that particular porridge, There was on the image Mike used to promote this video, there was a map, and you've mentioned maps a couple times. Do you do your own maps?
I do, yes. Yeah.
Can we see a few? You got any right there?
Not on paper that I can hold up.
Mike, do you have one that you used for the thing that you can show?
That's just a Mediterranean map. That's one I just got.
One of mine.
Right.
No, I've got some I could screen share, but that would probably be complicated.
Isaac has a thing here. 1, your world building's above and beyond, and 2, you're British. I don't know where he's going with this, but I'm waiting for number 3.
It's well spotted, Isaac.
I was going to say, in a silly yet somewhat serious question, have you thought about doing a cookbook for your world?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You see, in those moments when you fantasize about what you'd do if you were independently wealthy, I fantasize about hiring a whole team to develop my world with me, including a chef, and an architect and a fashion designer, and all the rest of it. Yeah, certainly a cookbook.
Yep. So I think Aaron is right. You could have a YouTube channel that well blows past what Bald&Balding has ever done.
Within like the first week.
Yeah. And Isaac is very much interested. Yeah, this is what I want to retire and just build worlds. That would be wonderful. The one quote that I don't know where I heard it from, but it's military history is determined by geography, and I'm like, God, that's so true, and that's why I love maps. And and they always talk about the Khyber Pass in Afghanistan when they say it. But they're like, how many great armies have gone in there and been demolished going through the Khyber Pass because it's narrow and people can roll rocks down at you. But yeah, so absolutely love this sort of world building. This is right up my alley.
When you talk about music, Ollie, do you play instruments as well?
Yeah, I do. Well, I actually don't, because I cannot persuade myself to pick up an instrument and practice anymore because I am obsessing on the draft I'm working on at the moment. I'm hoping it will come back to me. But my first degree was actually in music, and I spent a few years plugging away trying to make a living playing covers and wallpaper jazz. But
you strike me as someone who will at some point have played some really obscure freaking instrument.
No, I just played a bass guitar.
Oh, okay, all right. I was kind of waiting for like some damn thing I'd never heard of from the 16th century or something.
No, but I listened to some damn strange music.
Okay, that's fair. So languages. We were talking about this before we started, and I don't know if you got into this in the first minute that I wasn't here, but you have developed languages, plural, for this world. How/why? Not really why, but the how is kind of intriguing.
Why is an interesting question, and it's because I grew up with Middle Earth, and I was intrigued by why I found it so compelling compared to any other fantasy world or science fiction world that I had encountered. And I kind of fixated on the fact that Tolkien had invented languages for it. And actually now, quite a number of years later, I don't think that's quite it, or it's not all of it anyway. But that was what got me really interested in the idea of what you can do if you are actually aware of what the other language is that your characters speak. One of the wonderful things about it relates directly to maps, actually, which is the etymologies, and that's one of the things that sucks me into Tolkien every time, is that every place that anyone encounters has a name, and it's something like Amon Sul or Emin Baraid, and you don't know what that means, but actually you can go and find out what that means. And it has, in the same way as an English place name, it has a history and it has a meaning, and there is a way that place came to be called that thing, and through the language the history gets embodied in the geography. They're all kind of one thing, and that was absolutely a motivation for it, which doesn't explain why I felt the need to have languages that you could write fully functional sentences in, but that's what got me started down that road.
How many languages do you speak?
One.
I was kind of there was a little kind of horrible part of me hoping you would say one, because
rather than 17. Yeah,
right.
No,
17 you would go, okay, yeah, you made up some languages, that makes sense, but only speaking the one language and then you made up languages. So how many are there, and how detailed are these other languages?
There are 5 languages that I can make sentences in, and know how to ask questions or ask the time of day or whatever. They are fully functional in that sense, but different. Actual people who know about languages would find some of them more convincing than others. Let's put it that way. Some of them are quite schematic. Some of them are quite detailed. And I basically I read a book on how to do it by a guy called Mark P. Rosenfelder. There's a whole community out there of people who construct languages as an art form in order to, for the sheer aesthetic pleasure of what that language is like. And they read each other's reference grammars and they go, wow, that is an absolutely beautiful subjunctive you've got there. And and I'm on the very, very fringes of that, in that I'm very ignorant, really. You know, everything I know about linguistics, I've learned from doing this and from reading books by real experts on how to construct a language. But, you know, I'm feeling my way into it. And it gives me something that I can put down on a page and say, here's a sentence from this language. Or indeed, as Isaac is asking, do my languages have unique alphabets? Yes, they do. I have developed writing systems, some of which are shared between languages, some of which are unique to particular languages. And that's one of the funnest things about doing it. I mean, I've been inventing writing systems since I was a small child, you know. And I saw runes, and I saw the runes in The Hobbit, and you know, and I thought I'm going to make up my own, and I did, and I've been doing it ever since. And one of the main writing systems in my world is one I developed when I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and I still really like it.
Can you ask us for a beer in one of your languages?
No, I'd have to go away and look it up.
So you haven't memorized any of these?
No, you know, I couldn't really even write something down without I should have prepared some. I should have prepared some
You need to have something
sentences.
tattooed on your arm.
Yeah.
I was at a grocery store once, and the girl checking out the groceries, she had a tattoo on her arm, and I looked at it, and I'm just kind of, and I said, is that Elvish? and she was, first of all, thrilled / amazed that someone knew what it was on her arm. But yeah, she had Elvish on her arm, written on her arm.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I've encountered
cool.
that as well. And if I have no tattoos, but if I ever get a tattoo, I will definitely be getting a tattoo of text in one of my languages.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe Mike will get it in his head.
I was going to say, there's plenty of real estate here.
Yeah. What do you want to write there?
You have a sigil or a rune for bald?
Well, certainly, you know, if I don't have a word for it, I can derive one pretty quickly.
Yeah, if you could make one for bald and balding, we'll change our logo.
I will do that for you. I will do that for you in one of my languages and write it down in the appropriate writing system and send it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Then we could each get our own tattoo, the bald and the balding.
Yeah.
You know, if I didn't already have plans for the back of my head, I'd ask for bald in like all 5 languages, and I just put 5 lines of text. But sadly, I already have plans for the back of my head. So
fair.
So you're looking at a trilogy, but you've got all of the. How much of what you've constructed will you use in your first trilogy, or is it going to be, focused on a very particular area?
Yeah, it's going to be very focused. It's going to be a tiny fraction of what I've used, even about the area in which I'm setting it. I feel you need to know more in order to, convince with the few details and casual mentions that do come in. And I feel like there is a difference between a story in a made-up world where all of those tiny little details that do poke above the surface are all related to each other and come out of this big bedrock that has been coherently thought through, and one where those details have just been made up on the spur of the moment by the writer as they went through. And I think that is what Tolkien did, and that's what I'm trying to emulate. So, yeah, you get the tips of lots of icebergs, but most of them will never be seen unless you buy my source books.
And there you go. That was the next question. Tolkien eventually, or his family, released the Silmarillion, which kind of let you kind of connect some of the dots from the story. And
his family released the Silmarillion, which kind of you kind of connect some of the dots from the story.
Hey, Palmer,
And his family released the Silmarillion, which kind of
Hey, Palmer.
Okay, that would work.
Here, I'm going to tell in private chat.
Okay. Are you planning on releasing something like that that lets people kind of go back and say, "Oh, okay, this is why X, Y, or Z"?
Yeah, I have a big kind of early mythology of the world in development, and I would love to just kind of write that for a while and get that finished. I just kind of do bits of it as I need them, but yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, I would love to think, possibly naively, that people will be interested to read that stuff, and I'd love to publish that.
I have two words for you, Ollie. Kickstarter.
Yes.
When your first book is ready, and if you have that background book to come out,
and the cookbook.
And the cookbook, right? I think those are your keys. I think you will be pleasantly surprised at how many people would want that background, especially if that was the only way they could get it, right? Is through your Kickstarter. I think you would do amazingly well at that. And there are so many shows kind of like this to get the word out when you have that thing created, that the fantasy reading public, I think, really has kind of been wanting something like that. I don't know that they kind of sit there and think, "Oh, this is what I want," but I think when they hear about it, they go, "Jesus, that's cool," right? And I would like to read something that someone has put that much kind of time and love and effort into.
That's really great to hear. And I'm so tied up in the world of making the world that and writing the books, and my head is down and I'm focused on my keyboard, and I really lack awareness and need tutoring in how to do these things. But it's really good to hear you say that you think that there would be an audience for this, because
two things. One, hello, Palmer.
Hi, Palmer.
Hey, I totally thought this started an hour later, I would have been here, and I missed the first half. So I have a question, and maybe you answered it already, Ollie. So with your languages, so your languages are part of your first book, right? Somewhat.
They will feature in some way, yes.
Okay, and then are you including a lexicon or a glossary or a language decoder in the back? Are you thinking?
No, because the only bits of the actual made-up languages that will appear in text will appear as a short extract in the writing system that I've invented, followed by transliteration into Latin alphabet, and then followed by an English translation. So everyone will and there'll be short poems at the start of chapters and stuff like that.
So then that gets back to kind of, I think, what Ro was talking about, which is, like when we were sitting together and I was looking at your languages and being like, wow, this is amazing. Can you say such and such in your language? Like, can you feed the dog? And you're like, yeah, sure. And then you went and you wrote this sentence. I'm like, oh my God. So if you had really crazy fans, they would want to be able to use your language. Right.
Yeah. And in order to have a reference that I can look at to go, okay, how do I do this? If I want to say, could you please put the cat out? Although that's probably not what I'd want to say. I've written what's called reference grammars, which are basically fairly discursive texts explaining all the features of the language. So they wouldn't actually take a huge amount of tidying up before I could publish them and make them available to people.
Right. So you've got the grammar, you got the vocabulary, and you got alphabets, which are not Roman alphabets.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
On an entirely more practical kind of question. Well, no, I'm sorry if that sounds dismissive. It's not meant to be. When you have different languages like that use different symbols than what we're used to, or runes or whatever, how do you type that on a page?
Oh, I don't. I have to write it by hand. So I could use a software package like Fontographer, and produce a font that I could type on. But because the characters don't appear on my physical keyboard, and because I don't know my languages very fluently, that would be really, really hard to do anyway. So what I do is I usually draw them either physically or with an Apple Pencil, and and that suits, because they're all meant to be cursive anyway, or some are meant to be printed, but basically.
How will that, Mike? How do you think that would translate into loading something up onto Amazon?
Well, it would have to be an image. It would have to be an image.
All right. Okay.
Because I've had to do that for my books. Because I have a font made for like the Grammy series is the Grammy font and the Haley font, and your printer's not going to have that font. I paid to make it for me, so I have to just take an image of it in like 600 font so that I get the definition I need. So when I shrink it down as an image, it doesn't look pixelated. But yeah, that's very much true. And if you want to have fonts made, I have a great person from Fiverr who does mine. She's wonderful. It's about $80 to $100. She gives it to you in italics and everything. I always think I'm really interested in the languages, and then when people start and they mention fricative, I'm like, nope, I'm out. I've heard that before. I don't know what that is, and I'm not going to learn. And that's where I'm like, okay, I've hit my molt. That's it. Pull back. But I have two questions. One for both of you, since you're both here. How was Worldcon, and who was really in charge of the free library?
No, that way. Barbara was.
No, Ollie was the boss. Actually, we had another boss named Kate Wood.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. She was really the boss, but Ollie was the manager.
I mean, Kate was across millions of things, it's such a huge operation. It completely blew my mind. Yeah, we were just in this tiny little bit called the Freebies Library, and Palmer came in ostensibly as my assistant, but turned out to know so many people and have such good ideas that basically I tried to stand back and let her do things as much as possible. And thanks to Palmer, we had loads of stock that self-published and independently published authors donated, because she reached out to her network, and we weren't looking at getting very many donations from trad publishers. So that was real insight for me into the indie publishing world as well, which I was only kind of dimly aware of. And what a wonderful community. I was so excited to be privy to that.
Yeah, it was pretty fun, because people who were at the con, the indie authors and booktubers and bloggers and stuff would stop by. So it was a little bit of a central hub and we were right across from the food trucks, which didn't hurt. But so there was kind of this constant flow of people through, and it was really a fun place. And Ollie had arranged it so there was a place to kind of chill, tables and chairs, although we wanted couches. But and so people were just hanging out there. It worked out pretty well, I thought.
Yeah, it worked out excellently, and feedback was incredibly positive from all kind of levels and areas of the Worldcon team. It was
and what was really cool. So when I first contacted Ollie, it was to get my own books there, because I had asked about book bags and they sent me to Ollie. So there's no book bag, but they're doing a freebie space. So I asked him, and if I could send my books, and we arranged that. And then I was like, because I volunteered at a bunch of cons over the years, usually in the art show. And so I said, hey, Ollie, if you need help, let me know. And he eventually said, yeah, that would kind of be good, because I want to go to a bunch of panels and stuff. So, and then, he started talking about the lack of inventory, because the trad publishers weren't really like coming out of the woodwork to do that. And so, so I said, well, I know a bunch of indie authors, and I was expecting you to say no, because typically when indie authors or self-published authors ask anything, particularly of a Worldcon, which is very trad publishing focused, is where the Hugos are awarded. Usually they're like, no. But you were like, oh, okay. And then Kate was like, oh, I love indies. So it was really your guys' openness and receptiveness to the indie community that allowed it to happen. Because any other people had other people been in charge, the answer might have been different.
Right. When people have an institutional mindset, they tend to be very anti-indie. So I'm half of the time I'm a librarian, public librarian, and the library service that I work for is resolutely anti-indie. Not like they hate those people, but they just don't trust those people to have done due diligence and had sensitivity readers and proper editorial processes and all of that. And they're scared that if they let indie authors onto the shelves, then something with, you know, fascism in it or racism will slip past, and then they'll be liable.
No, there'll be chaos.
Yeah.
So that's England. That's the process in England, right?
Did you really say?
Well,
did you say the phrase sensitivity readers?
Beg your pardon?
Did you say the phrase sensitivity readers?
I did, yes.
Okay, I'm just doing my job here. What the hell is a sensitivity reader?
Someone who reads your draft and tells you if you have gone about it in a way or used language that is going to cause offense to someone, or not necessarily just offense, but also possibly actively harm someone who is in a vulnerable minority of some sort, whether they are disabled, they belong to a racialized ethnicity, or any of that. So people employed
in the US we call that censorship.
Okay, sure.
But you know, public libraries or school libraries are going through this whole thing in the United States where, you know, there's what we're calling book bans, where, you know, parents or librarians are removing books from the shelves that have, you know, trust, you know, LGBTQ topics, mostly, anything.
You know what? In a really odd way, I don't think you should ever ban a book, but in a really odd way, I think that is probably the best thing ever for this generation, because I don't think there is anything that would make a 13-year-old want to read a book more than being told they can't read it. I know I would read books that I would never read before if someone said you can't read it.
Kids that were only very dimly aware that there were books in their school will suddenly be like, oh, I'm not allowed that. What, is there sex in it? Let's have a look.
Yeah. But in the United States, they're banning things like Charlotte's Web and Lord of the Flies and Anne Frank and stuff like that. But the public libraries, I think, are more open, but they probably have some sort of rating systems. I don't know, for like movies, for adult content. I have no idea how the U.S. libraries work. But
we're very what's the word? Contrarian like that. You know,
rebellious.
Saying people will do almost anything you ask them to do, but nothing that you tell them to do.
I think that's the quality of a lot of teenagers. But yeah, so back to the point of that you're making, Oli. So indie authors self-published authors basically don't get into the UK library system because of that. Because I
can't speak for every library service, but I know it's not just Essex, which is who I work for. You know, institutions are litigation averse, aren't they? And worried about stuff like that.
I have to leave in 5 minutes, so I'm just going to say one more thing about freebie libraries, which is so based on my tutelage and my apprenticeship under Oli Arditi, I'm going to head up the freebies library in the Seattle Worldcon.
Yay! I'm so excited about that. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and I'm starting with Trad Publishing Outreach, actually, because we only had Del Rey and Head of Zeus who sent us books in Glasgow. Right. So I'm gonna start early with reaching out to all the Trad publishers. And
when you reach out to them, Palmer, when you reach out to them, do you put something in your request letter that says, we had a really excellent response from indie authors giving us books in Scotland, and if, you know, we're going to reach out to them, basically, if you don't help us out?
No, because I'm going to do the indie authors anyway. No, I'm not going to do that. But definitely the indie community will be very well treated. Or basically, we're opening it up to any indie authors who want to donate their books, like we did in Glasgow. It's just we had like a 6-week lead time in Glasgow, but I'll have I'll give people like much more time, like a 6-month lead time.
I realized taking that job on when I did, which was not long before you joined, Palmer, was that we needed to have reached out to all the big publishers a long time previously with a fairly hard sell, saying, this is a great opportunity for you. You should give us several hundred books, and because we didn't do that, lots of them, were unaware of really what a WorldCon was. And, people who worked there had got those jobs, long, after the last UK WorldCon, certainly. And it was just, we thought it would just materialize, or I assumed it would be materializing, and it wasn't. So,
Is there a concern if you make a call out to indie authors that you will just be inundated with books?
That's fine.
Yeah, we didn't have anything left.
Okay.
We had like one book left.
The stuff went like crazy. I mean, no, it's free, and they're new books. A lot in the audience, the membership at Glasgow, we had some feedback, anecdotal feedback, and people coming by that they were thrilled at having indie books there because they didn't know where to find them or how to find them. Like, they were exposed to books they never would have discovered, and they loved it. Yeah.
So Isaac asked, "What's a freebie library?" If you could just give a real quick.
Yeah, we're actually renaming it to the Freebie Lounge because you don't have to return them like you would in a library.
All right. Yeah.
So it's basically it's like a giveaway spot, like shelves. I think, Ollie, we're going to do the same thing with shelves and tables, and I asked for couches again, like comfy seating.
Hold out for couches.
I know. My boss in Seattle is super cool. So if you're coming, Ollie, you could be my apprentice, or we'll be co-hosts if you're going to make it to Seattle. And then LA, I'm talking about LA, doing it at LA as well. And there's also going to be more of an indie programming track on the programming side at Seattle. So that's exciting. So remember that your blog post, Ollie, where I put in that whole thing about ideas about programming. Well, they already have an indie programming director for Seattle, so they're on it already. So I'll be talking with her. I have to go, guys. Nice to see you, Ollie, and thanks for
lovely to see you, Palmer.
Yeah. So back to the interesting conversation about languages. And did you get to maps yet? Because he's a map maker too.
We have not got the maps yet.
All right. Bye, you guys.
Thanks, Palmer.
Take good care.
Okay,
something we've never done on the show before.
Yeah. Ro, do you feel insufficient now all of a sudden after Palmer was here?
Oh, I felt insufficient for so much longer than that.
So I have a question, Ollie, leading into the maps. For your setting for your book, did you choose like an English type setting? Is it European? Is it global? What do you have for us?
Yeah, I try not to be too obviously based on a existing culture. I try to build something up from the ground up, really, so that it will be less obviously European or Asian or whatever. So the draft I have finished, it's set in a northern area where it's very snowy in the winter, etc. But the people who live there, due to, long histories of migration and whatever, are, horse nomads originally, who originated in a much hotter area. So they bring lots of that culture with them. So it's not too obviously, England, but everyone's short and has 3/4 length trousers on, And the draft I'm working on at the moment, it's probably even less derivative of any real society that I know of. It's they live in a tropical area, although they're a very advanced civilization. They are a matriarchy. They live in communal houses. So I've taken quite a few decisions that differentiate it from Europe or from anywhere specific that I know of, although I'm sure there's stuff in there that is just emerging without me knowing about it.
With so much stuff, right? So much world building done. How did you decide on who your main character was going to be and what specific thing that they were going to be doing that kind of tied into that world?
So the draft I have finished, which is meant to be the first of a trilogy, is something I had knocking around for years as an idea and in early stages of development. And that is a very kind of classic, cozy kind of a cozy world in which young people suddenly are thrust into danger and have to go and be involved in a war, that kind of thing. So it's not so different from the kind of Lord of the Rings setup or from the setup of very many kind of epic fantasy stories. And I wanted to switch that up a bit. So it is a patriarchal society. It is the boy that's going off doing the fighting. So I thought, well, let's have his partner, a young woman, tell the story of him, but also tell her own story and what's going on with her at the same time. And so I switched it up like that. So those characters then just emerged from that initial idea. And I thought, I'm going to make her quite sassy. I'm going to make her smarter than him and, try to get some humor into it that way as well. The other, the draft I'm currently working on, really, I did some more detailed work on the setting and that area and that culture, and I can't tell you where it came from. They all just kind of sprang into life. All these characters, they were just,
Are they the same characters from book 1 to book 2?
No. So the trilogy will be a completely separate thing. What I'm working on now is a standalone with potential for being a series, and it's set in a completely different part of the world, and it's set a couple of 100 years later as well. So it's very separate.
Do you find it difficult working with timescales like that and trying to figure out how much progress a society would make over a given time?
I've deliberately chosen to make my societies very stable over time. And that's so that I can comment on the way that is the case in many kind of fantasy settings, and particularly in Tolkien as well, where, it's quite often the case, I think, that you can probably divide the timescales, the historical timescales, by 10, and then you would have something quite plausible. So they don't change a huge amount over time. And I'm looking at various cultural reasons for that. In Tolkien, it's because of the elves, right? It's completely plausible in Middle-earth because there are these people there who remember what it was like 10,000 years ago. They literally remember. And then some of the humans are in touch with them and are aware of that. And so there's this kind of solid connection to, the way things were and the way things, should be according to their kind of view of the world. And I'm playing with those ideas in the different ways that the different cultures in my world relate to the history and the historical timescale and the different rates at which they develop. And you're going to have to read every one of those 30 novels I'm going to write in order to get even the slightest, sense of how that's happening and playing out. But
probably not your best tagline.
Yes, probably not. Well, this is it. I am absolutely terrible at selling this. I have no elevator pitch, absolutely none. You guys have given me confidence in this conversation that there is a good elevator pitch for this, and I just need to find out what it is.
Well,
because you've been so enthusiastic about what I've said,
Just the amount of work you put into the backstory and the history of this world I think most people who read fantasy are going to be very encouraged by that because they know it's going to make sense, right? They know that whatever you put there is going to have some basis in something that exists as a historical reference, you know, and that's something most of us do not have going for us because we are, just like you said, we're just going to make shit up as we go, you know. And if it all kind of coalesces into something down at the end of the road, great.
And most people got into this because they want to write stories, right? And so they write stories. And I want to write stories as well, but I also want to do this other thing just as much or even more so.
So, Oli, do you have a timeline for when your first book is going to come out?
No, I don't, because I'm working on this draft of something that is hopefully reasonably marketable, and then I'm going to pitch to agents. And while I'm pitching to agents, I'm going to be redrafting the other thing, which I think I will probably self-publish. So, and I just don't know how long it's going to take because I don't have the experience. And I could ask other people, but actually I won't know how fast I do these things until I've done it. So, I'm hoping maybe in a couple of years or in the next couple of years.
Well, if you're going to go down the traditional route and try to do all that, I think you probably have to leave at least bare minimum a year to try to do that. But man, I would love to see you put together that compendium of the history while you're waiting for them to get back to you, so that at the end of a year or two, you could go out with a Kickstarter or something and say, hey, I've got the first 2 or 3 books of this done and this compendium history and, oh, by the way, a cookbook, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, they're right. The traditional thing didn't work. I'm going to do this myself. And
I want to give myself a chance of doing the trad thing, but I'm going to get it finished. I'm going to start pitching to agents. I'm not going to be in any expectation that is going to deliver anything anytime soon. Once I've got that book written and it's going out there, then I will continue to pitch it until I've completely developed my career as an indie author and I don't need to anymore, I guess. So
Oli, I have a question for you. What is your initial reaction if I say Oli is the second coming of Tolkien? Are you horrified? I guess you're laughing. What is?
No pressure.
I love Tolkien, and it is my ambition to do what he did, and I don't think any other writer has done what he did. That sounds really egotistical. I don't mean to achieve on the same level that he achieved, but to actually do my work, do the same kind of work that he did. And I don't think anyone has ever tried to emulate that, really, despite so many fantasy writers being referred to as Tolkien imitators. None of them imitate the things that I find interesting about him. So that's an incredibly lovely thing to hear. Of course, I'm hearing it from someone who hasn't seen my work. So
the reason why I ask,
let's hope I can live up to that kind of expectation.
The reason why I ask is if you're going to do a Kickstarter or something, you're going to have to put yourself out there. And the hardest thing for me is when people are like, hey, is Becoming a Druid a good book? I'm like, it's all right. That's about as far as I'm going to go because I'm just not, one to brag about myself.
Right,
and I'm just trying, like, if you're going to do a Kickstarter and say, hey, I got decades of world building just like Tolkien, if you put it out there with confidence, then I mean that your Kickstarter is going to go much, much better than the it's okay, because you really have to project confidence when you do that, and I am terrible at that.
I am as well, but I think you can, at least when you're not doing it in person to someone, you can at least kind of pretend you're a publicist that you've hired and just, role play that publicist and
do you ever, Oli, do you ever listen to the podcast Off Menu?
No, I don't. I haven't.
It's a British podcast. It's James Acaster and another comedian. Anyway, they had a guy on there recently who he was a fairly young guy. He's an actor, and he made up a personal assistant, right? So he made up this new email address. He made this female personal assistant's name. And when he needs to get like a hotel room or a restaurant table or something like that, he has the personal assistant send the message, right? Because it just sounds better. He said it's worked a treat. He said it's really worked very well. So that's what Mike's getting at, I think.
Excellent. Yeah.
So Isaac has another question, a very good question we probably should have asked, but that's why we have people in the comments to do our job.
That's right.
Yeah.
So writing style?
Yeah, no. So I'm not really trying to emulate Tolkien. Sometimes his kind of epic vibe is what I want. I don't do it by consciously emulating him. I probably more emulate Ursula K. Le Guin emulating Tolkien. The writers I love the most all feed into my style, I guess. But the people I admire most as novel writers are Ursula Le Guin and Gene Wolfe, I think, who are very different to Tolkien. And sometimes if I'm feeling I want something really baroque, I look at Mervyn Peake. I don't know if people generally know who Mervyn Peake is. He was an English fantasy writer and illustrator who was completely disconnected from the larger world of fantasy fiction, and he wrote a series called Gormenghast, which has the most wonderfully baroque language and naming in it anyway. And so so I go for him when I want to be baroque, and I go for other people when I want to be more austere. But no, Tolkien is not really a direct influence on my prose.
You were the first person I've ever heard say the words "when I want to be more baroque."
Sometimes you really like that. You really want that kind of gnarly and kind of highly figured kind of language. I do like it. It's off-putting to some people, I know, but
in short doses, it's fine. I wouldn't want a book written that way.
Right. It got like really dark out behind you really fast, man.
Me, yeah, I guess, yeah. 5 o'clock. It's 5. It's now 6:10 here. We started at 5. That's when it's getting dark at this time of year here. Yeah. In fact, after tonight, the clocks are changing, so it would have been dark before we started tomorrow.
Oh, good grief! I gotta look that up. Sorry.
Okay. So note to self: when scheduling, I have to double check with time change because we don't change until next week. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, next Sunday. All right.
So.
Yeah. You got anything else, Mike?
I was going to say, so you got a standalone you're working on now. You got your trilogy. You've written you've written the first draft and some of the second book. Which is going to come out first, the series or the standalone, or do you know?
I don't know. No, that just if I start pitching to agents with the standalone and someone decides they like it straight away, then wonderful. But I have no expectation of that happening. In which case, the other thing will start coming out self-published while I'm continuing with that process. Yeah. Once I've got something out, then I can start thinking about all the ancillary stuff, the source books and the maps and the languages and stuff like that, and the cookbook.
Do you have any social media accounts or anything where people can follow you?
Yeah, I do. I am Paracyclops on Instagram.
Yeah, you're going to have to spell that.
Paracyclops.
Paracyclops?
No, Paracyclops.
Paracyclops.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
And I am just myself on Facebook. And if you search for me on Mastodon, you will find me under my name. And I set fire, and I haven't gone on to anything like Blue Sky or Threads yet. So that's about it.
You're not on Twitter at all?
No, I deleted my account.
And your website is?
It's oliverarditi.com.
Yep.
It's what now?
oliverarditi.com.
Yeah, you got that, Mike?
I'll do that. Yeah.
Okay. I can put that in there. Between the two of us, we'll hear something.
Yeah.
All right.
And is that right?
That's it. Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah.
I can spell sometimes.
Woohoo.
And it's not even in a made-up language.
Ollie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us from Suffolk today. Go get yourself an Adnams or something and relax a little bit.
I'm on the Camden Hells already.
All right.
I didn't wait. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a really fun conversation. I'm really flattered to have been asked. And it's actually been really useful to me. I feel like I've learned loads from talking to you guys. So
and remember us when you have a book launch. You can come back on and tell us all about it.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see it, actually. I hope you choose to publish sooner rather than later.
Yeah, selfishly, me too. Yep. Okay, well, take care, everybody.
Thanks.